This episode of Raw Green is brought to you by OBI, a sustainability consultancy firm specialized in life cycle assessment and decarbonization strategies. At OBI, we've designed our new Chief Sustainability Officer package to empower SMEs with comprehensive ESG solutions at a fraction of the cost compared to traditional solutions. Our entry package includes a full ESG report covering scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, a tailored emission reduction strategy, access to GRI certified software, and more. What sets us apart? Affordability. Our goal is to make sustainability accessible to businesses of all sizes. Contact us for a free consultation at info@oneob.com or through the links provided in the description. And now, get ready for the next episode of Raw Green. Ciao! Today, we're going to talk about the omnipresent backbone of our digital age, data centers. While they may stay in the background, data centers play an indispensable role in our daily lives. From streaming videos to managing our finances, these technological hubs are the silent engines powering our interconnected world. But, as Uncle Ben once said, with great power comes great responsibility. And data centers consume gigantic amounts of energy and water in their operations. The sheer scale of their consumption is eye-opening, prompting us to better study the environmental footprint of our digital habits. According to the International Energy Agency, estimated global data center electricity consumption in 2022 was 240 to 340 terawatt hours, or around 1 to 1.3% of global final electricity demand. And this excludes energy used for cryptocurrency mining. So integrating sustainability into data center operations is obviously paramount. And what about AI? Is it going to be a friend or a foe in reducing environmental impacts? The guest we have today has over 20 years of experience in data center management and an expert in developing strategies and brings solutions aimed at reducing data centers' environmental impacts. Mr. John Clark. Welcome, John.
Thank you. That's a very nice introduction there, and thank you very much for that. So yeah, no, brilliant. Nice to be here, and thank you for that good introduction. So yeah.
Good. Why don't you give us a little bit more, let us more about yourself, what you do?
Yeah, happy to. So yeah, my name's Jonathan Clark. So I'm the data center sustainability lead at Derns. I work and support Derns, which is an engineering company who do MEP design for data centers, aviation, airports, life sciences, and electronics, and also got a real estate team as well. But I focus heavily on the data center side. Unfortunately for my sins, I've got over 20 years experience in this sector, starting off a long time ago when I first set foot in a data center, installing servers, selling servers into them for the likes of an Arqiva and sort of like other sites as well. And I suddenly saw the complex of like ex bunkers that have been converted into data centers, satellite dishes on top of them, and I was like, wow, what is this world that I've sort of stepped into, and how does this all work? And then sort of like had a bit of a passion. Then more recently, over the last couple of years, that has sort of like developed further and further. I've been like a commercial director for a company called Carbon Z a couple of years ago, and now over in Derns. But yeah, very familiar with how data centers work and operate, what's the good, the bad, the ugly, and how we need to get them to become more sustainable, where some of those big pain points are, and as you rightly said, where is AI a friend or a foe? I personally think it can be a bit of a friend, but it's really interesting just to understand how this is going to shape out, because at the moment I view AI as that unruly toddler in the
Mhm.
room that suddenly it's been born, it's now walking, and it's a case of it's there and it's starting to have a big impact and it's causing chaos. And everyone's like, how do we cope with this little toddler running around? And it's rapidly growing up, but more and more people are developing more and more tools, and semiconductor industry is rapidly evolving as well to support AI, and it's causing huge amounts of changes. So it's really, really interesting. It's how we then push this back to do things more sustainably. So it's really cool, but it's a case of it's a really exciting time to be part of the industry. And I think there's a lot of people trying to come up with solutions and technologies and strategies to how to deal with this. And yeah, it's just a really fascinating time to be here, depending on the company's direction and what they're looking to do and how we can look to support it. So it's really
It
cool.
is definitely fascinating. It is definitely fascinating. So much things. Also, we're talking about a umbrella of technologies. Data centers covered and ticks so many angles and so many technologies. That is fascinating, and that's why also there's so much capital intensive. I mean, everything surrounding data
Yeah,
centers.
it is scary. I mean, I mean, there's a couple of scary facts I sort of picked up the other day, whereby I think we're now looking at, I think my children's probably going to be even more, but every 18 seconds, we're probably going to be touching a data center by 2025. So if that's from your work life, your home life, from emails to Netflix to streaming channels to YouTube,
Every
all of
18
these sit in
seconds.
different, in every 18 seconds. So if you pick up your phone, and most people now are trying to get out of the habit of being addicted to their mobile phones or trying to put them down, but even so, they've probably got either smartwatches or got their laptops on or a tablet somewhere, or even now,
Yeah.
it's daft, right? My washing machine, right, has got an AI connectivity or has got the ability to Wi-Fi into the house. So if it wants to, it can ping me a message just saying the washing's finished. We're living in more and more of an integrated world, and in the background of that is like all this data that's being churned up and analyzed and sent through. So yeah, it's just bizarre. And if we then include like the Ring doorbells and everything else, I mean, we're living in such a digital age where I don't think sometimes we all realize how many touch points we have with large data sets and data centers in the background, and how many different environments or workspaces we're touching on a day-to-day basis. I think sometimes people just presume it's lovely, it's in the cloud, it's up there somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about it.
Yeah, it's a fugazi. Yeah, it's a dark magic going around a
Mm.
spell. You know, I
And
got it. But
yeah,
if you want to, let's say, quantify. Okay, let's take one moment and think how impactful
mm,
are data centers, and in terms of like obviously energy and water consumption, which are the two main. But
yeah.
if you want to compare it, for example, one average data center uh, equates to the consumption of how many homes?
This is scary. So it depends on the size. So years ago, you're probably looking at data centers which are probably anywhere between 100 to a megawatt, right? And
Mm.
that is equivalent to, let's say, if you take 50 kilowatts of power or 100 kilowatts of power, that's approximately like 25 to 50 houses
Hmm.
standard, that was built out. And if we're now looking at some of the new hyperscaler builds and the use of AI and what that's going to be, we're probably now looking at data center sites which are between 20, 60, coming up to like a 1 gigawatt of power, which is starting to get into the ballpark sort of. So we're talking like not small towns anymore. We're talking like a large scale town of power and consumption being utilized for their needs. And this is why the governments and like the United Nations and everyone else in Germany has recently led the charge of like enforcing some new regulations, just due to the fact that they're aware of how much power is being utilized for the cooling infrastructure. And this is where you quite rightly say it depends on the cooling stack technology they utilize in the background. So are they using water-based cooling? Are they using air-based cooling? Are they
Hmm.
using a hybridization of some of the new in-rows and rear doors, or are they now looking at single phase or sort of like from an immersion perspective to get sort of reach the higher levels? All of this comes with a big impact of actually the local resources and how that's being planned out. So what we're seeing is data centers are now having to look at the overall PUE, which is where the energy management comes through from. So
The power
PUE for
user
people that aren't
effectiveness. Yeah,
efficiency,
efficiency. Yeah.
for the sites. I think Germany's trying to get it down to about 1.3 by 2030 across the board. I think they've got some mitigation plans for all new sites, and existing sites to be about 1.5 by 2028, but then to get it all down to
That's
about
the average
1.3.
now.
And it's really interesting. Well, that's the problem. I mean, you've got lots of sites in the background have been designed and operated from an MEP engineering perspective. We're probably looking at a design standard, probably about 1.4, which historically your older sites probably about 1.8, right? But it comes down to then the IT load. So if they're not being fully utilized, but they've still got all their cooling infrastructure running correctly, or they haven't got energy management software being deployed correctly, their PUE might be around 2 or even like 2.5 or perhaps even higher than that. So this is why there's such a big sort of like demand starts to come through from a sustainability aspect of actually what processes and what better practice can be put on board to get our data centers to be greener, because they're using such vast amounts of power. It's looking at, okay, what can it to do? And for some data centers, they don't even have that option, because if they're a colo provider and they've sold it to a big company and that company's got that space and they reserved it, but they're only using half of their site, they might have the best designed site, which has got a PUE of an operational PUE of 1.2, 1.3. But because the people that then rented out the halls and using their facility are only taking up half of that space, but they're having to run it all, their operational PUE might be actually about 2.2, but they don't have any control over that. So this is where the conversation sort of needs to step up a bit more in the marketplace and actually go, how are we looking to manage this and how it's looking to be run? Because it's starting to now develop the conversations and become much more rounded. But this is where we're seeing a lot of these challenges, because we're seeing in the States massively heavy reductions on water usage efficiency coming through. We're seeing the EU with a new legislation coming in, which is now in place for CSRD, which is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is then looking at not just the power, but it's also then looking at the water efficiency and how much carbon's being produced, and plus the energy management for those sites. So it's again driving the conversation the right way, but it's a case of a lot of companies are now having to go, right, how do we make the best case? How do we proposition ourselves to be able to forward with new strategies and a new technology? And as you said at the start, we've then also got AI coming through as this unruly toddler going, right, we want to have this. And we're then also looking at, for them, God, what, 25, 50 gigawatts, terawatts of power being developed for them, because it's not just a replacement for cloud, or this is an enhancement of it. So cloud infrastructure is going to stay the same. All the basic infrastructure we've got today is still going to be needed. That's not going to go away. AI is an add-on. This is on top of, so it's not a replacement at all. So it's how we then look to manage this differently, and then looking to, unfortunately, like the IT companies and the chip manufacturers who are creating the servers and creating the sort of semiconductors and the chips that are being utilized. And as they're sort of like driving down to smaller and smaller spaces, and they're then saying, right, we come from 5 millimeters, we're down to say, okay, right, anything below 5 now needs to be liquid cooled. What does that mean? The data center is going, right, okay. So let's say you've got a refresh for an IT company in 2 years' time, and they're going, right, what servers can we buy? Great, we can reduce our estate, but now also need to be water cooled or new ways of cooling. So this is causing quite a bow wave to start coming through, which is really, really interesting. And it's just a case of how we then support and put strategies in place and like work it through. So yeah, it's not easy at all, because we're then from my side, I mean, I'm having to look at energy efficiency. I'm having to look at cooling innovations, new technology. We add on then renewable energy
Yeah.
for the sites, which is now coming through as well. We're now looking at solar, wind, if that's possible, with no locations. Hydro, is that possible? We're now also having to look at biomethane. Is that possible? Could that be
Let me
accessible?
ask you something
Hydrogen for
about
those
that.
sites, depending on natural gas.
Let me ask
Yeah.
you something. You raised a very, very important point because
Mm.
when you read on the news, Google setting up 300 megawatts of solar for their data centers, Microsoft
Mm.
250 megawatts of wind for their data centers, and so on. Now,
Mm.
are all of those in PPA? Then and then they offset the balance from the grid, or because how do they manage the intermittency from renewables? Because one thing is for sure, data centers cannot stay
Mm.
even for a fraction of a second without energy.
No, no, yeah, you're quite right. I mean, if they are an uptime tier 3, I think the regulations are 99.997, I think for 3, and you've got then for 4 sites is like nearly 100%, but you've got tier 2, which is still like 99.965 or something like that in the background. So yeah, I mean, they can't be down, and this is whereby the power you're quite right. So the likes of what Google, AWS are doing in the background, where they're building these massive solar farms, which are 300 megawatts. The challenge you then have is then from a transportation of the power from the grid infrastructure and how close that is then to the site. So they're building this great big infrastructure, which is fantastic from one point of view because it's putting green energy on the grid, and that is
Mm-hmm.
brilliant. I think that's fantastic regardless. But you then raise a very valid point as well from a PPA perspective. So let's say they're creating 300 megawatts on a site for offset, but let's say they're actually using 6.5, 7 gigawatts across in those states as well of power that they're actually getting from the grid for the hyperscalers. That's not really enough renewables for those sites to actually make them green from that perspective, from a true PPA perspective. And this is where we're starting to see governments really also cracking down on that PPAs as well, saying, well, if you've got these green certificates and you're looking to put in place these more green efficiencies, that's fantastic. We'll continue to encourage that, but you need to be doing more infrastructure and actually what you're doing locally and actually directly as well as part of that, because we're seeing these challenges that are coming through. And again, with the power demands and also the cooling demands coming through for those sites for how they're looking to run them, yeah, it's not an easy fix at all. And this is why there's new technologies. This is why we've got modular nuclear reactors sort of coming out, SMRs, and
We're
micro
talking
modular
about many
reactors
years.
coming out.
Yeah, modular.
And we're looking at those probably like 5, 10 years away. Yeah,
Yeah,
which
easy.
is, and there'll be potentially 2 tennis courts producing, the bigger ones producing what, 200 to 700 megawatts of power. Fantastic. We can have microgrids by that point. But the problem is,
Yeah.
as you rightly said, that's quite far down the line. So at the moment, it's a case of looking at the local infrastructure, looking at the power that is available in the network and moving it out. And this is why there's quite a big drive now about the edge for data center sites, which is perhaps looking to mitigate some of those risks from an energy, whereby you have slightly smaller sites, but you have more of them,
Mm.
and then you can then grow your network, but potentially then gives more availability to be closer to your clients and closer to your end users, but then have that data. It sort of like frees up some of those challenges, and that's some of the things the industry's sort of like been looking at and discussing over the last couple of years, is how edge sites get deployed and how they get managed. And I think now a lot of those solutions and technologies are coming to fruition. And then we're also now looking at as well is the battery solutions as well. So as we're now looking at what is the replacement tech for that. So if you can, this is like the panacea from Ciiiao, if you can get to a position whereby you're creating renewables on site and you can store that energy correctly and efficiently, and and you're not then going to be wasting it. So we're not but it's also being green. So what type of batteries are we looking at? New like sodium, or are we looking at sort of some of the new SSD batteries that are coming out? And as they look to develop, but if we can increase our battery hold, does that then mean effectively not having to rely as heavily on the grid, or we can actually push back onto the grid when there's excess that's being produced? Because we've got a good battery storage, we can then run the sites remotely from there and have the resiliency and the redundancy from that perspective and not have to worry. But this is where new technology is scrambling to catch up. We've got governments and regulations that are scrambling to sort of like advise correctly, but at the same time, they've got big companies that are lobbying about, oh, don't do that too quickly, because we've got a lot of dependencies on this as well. So it's a real, this is why
it's a
this is why
double-edged
data
sword,
centers
though.
are such a
It is a
yeah.
double-edged sword. So if I understood properly, you were saying that the latest movement it is to have smaller data centers, but thoroughly dispatched around, rather than building the massive, super big data center ones. Is that correct? Because
Well,
in my
it was
in my
yeah,
mind, yes, you definitely mitigate some risks. You mitigate
yeah,
also the part of resource depletion concentrated in one area, and it gets a
mm,
little bit more sparse around. Okay, but at
mm,
the same time, what we're talking about emission from operations of the building. There are also emission from the construction of the data center,
yes,
okay, which also plays a pretty important part in the overall life cycle assessment
your
of a data center.
scope 3 goes through the roof.
Through the roof, yes, exactly, exactly. So, and then you mentioned it twice. Hyperscalers, which what are
Yeah.
hyperscalers? I mean, by the word, I think there's something humongous like spaceships. That's the first thing that comes in mind.
Yeah, I mean, hyperscalers, so to give you a bit of a background, so modular edge sites are traditionally small edge sites, which are potentially between 100 to like 1 to 2 megawatts of power. They could also be looked at as small colo sites as well. Co-location sites are normally smaller data center operators that are outside of like the major cities. So outside of like Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris, and Dublin. Think of from a European perspective. That again, probably between 5 to 10 megawatts of power, which is still quite substantial. We're then sort of like looking at the larger telcos and the larger hyperscalers, which then sort of work in and with each other as well. And there we tend to find ourselves looking at sites starting at 20 megawatts, but also going up to 60 to 100 megawatts of power.
Jesus.
Um, this is based out quite heavily at the moment from traditional cooling methods and rack densities, whereby we're looking at racks. To give an example, so a rack is normally where you put your IT, your servers, your switches, your networking power, and might even have some resilience and redundancy in there as well. It's normally like 1 meter squared by about 2 meters tall. It's normally about between 47 to 50 U, and 1 U is normally where you put all the cabling in. And normally the power for those would be about between 3 to 10 kilowatts historically. So you can get an idea. So when we're talking about those are really big, large scale sites with that type of power, and they will have halls, data halls with potentially 100 to 200 racks, and they'll have several of those halls repeated in and out with then connectivity in and out of those rooms. So that is what sort of like the traditional hyperscaler looks like. The smaller colo sites would, to give an example, might only have 100 to 200 racks, but they are literally got 2 data halls or 3 data halls, and they've got resilient redundancy. Small edge or really small colo sites might only have 50 racks, or probably less than that, depending on what they're looking to deploy and depending on their size. So they're quite small, either bespoke ones or next door where you expect to. They normally sit outside like the flat market. we are now seeing, due to the size of these sites and space and where the power requirements are, that they are now expanding outside of that. So I think in London, just this week, there have been announcements on the East End. They're now looking at a couple of 70 megawatt sites that are being developed, probably for hyperscalers and for other big, large telcos and end users, which is huge. So you can start getting an understanding. And obviously, the main reason why they're looking outside of sort of like central London spaces is again because there's that availability in the grid and the network. They've also got that availability as well, where there is green renewables coming in from some of the wind coming through from the channel. They've got other green aspects as well they can look through as well, but they've also got then the power purchase agreements that they can make with the European networks as well for their green power also coming into their strategy as well. So this is where we sort of start seeing a lot of these larger data center sites coming through. And to be honest, we're probably still going to continue to see them for a long time to come with, because there's still a growing demand. Unfortunately, data storage and the likes of Netflix or Disney or your like streaming channels in the background, they're going to still need to have very large data storage or data processing plants for what we do day to day. That's not AI. That's not high density. There could be elements of that in there, but primarily all they wanted to do is store really large files and formats and have lots of people access and make that available to them. That is perfect for those examples and perfect for those users. Or just for companies with large data sets just to store them in there. Where we're looking at other avenues with new technologies of like the use of AI, that's a slightly different example of actually how the technology gets deployed again and actually where that might work. So this is why lots of data centers are how I'm scratching their heads going, do we create hybrid sites now? Because we want to cope for one client over here and then also be able to cope with this client over here with this requirement. But it's a real balancing act, because you then got to look at, are they looking at carbon offsetting as well as part of this,
I hope
software optimization, and then sort of like IT policies as well. So
yeah. But sorry, which part of the data center it is the most impactful one? It is like the servers, the racks of servers. It is the cooling system. If you have to divide by energy weight, which one would be the most impactful one? I know they're connected one to each other, obviously, but on your electricity bill or on electricity bill of your clients, sorry, which part it is most expensive?
Well, the best way to think about it, so for our clients, so the way the data center industry works is that for the energy they consume, the largest part of that is actually going to be for the servers and actually for the infrastructure that goes into the racks, by and far. What we then see is then from the use efficiency from mechanical and electrical for the cooling systems of that, we're then looking at either, again, depends on their design and how they've been operated, we're probably looking at between 30 or 25% of that power, as well as that being just utilized for cooling, right? And also for back-end infrastructure. So the largest part that we see on a day-to-day basis is actually the operational running of the servers in the background. And then the cooling infrastructure is a much smaller percentage of it, because the halls, using new standards and new temperature raises, are starting to be lifted up a lot more. So the cooling infrastructure is not having to be run as hard. The problem is, though, is when you've got that much power and servers being run, you still have to run quite a large or a huge amount of cooling infrastructure to keep it at that temperature and to keep it at the right level. So this is the challenge that we sort of find ourselves in, and the crux of it, really. So,
Yeah, fascinating. Okay, thank you for that. Now, if you don't mind, let's talk about something that nobody talks about it. AI. I want to share with you.
Okay.
I want to share with you these two quotes. Okay, let me take my notes. Okay, quote number 1: AI has the potential to reduce 5 to 10% of greenhouse gases emissions by 2030. Quote number 2:
right.
a new AI search query requires 10 times the energy than a traditional Google search. Now,
Correct.
the first one is from a research study co-authored by the Boston Consulting Group and Google, which is, to reduce 5 to 10% greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, so it's 5.5 years, almost 6 years. It's a pretty ballsy statement because that it is basically the entirety of the emissions of India. Okay. The second one, so the first one, it is from Boston Consulting Group and Google. The second one, it is from Google itself. So what's the story here? Because from one side, it is clear that AI, it is going to bring that computing power that it is going to help in climate modeling and consequent mitigation efforts, okay? But at what cost? So your job of making data center more sustainable, it's going to be even more under pressure. Good luck.
So basically, it's like a double-edged sword, which is quite right. AI is... I'm a bit an advocate. I think AI is brilliant. I also completely understand from a data center perspective, it's like you sort of like that is that moment, like how do we do this? AI can potentially look to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, right? What it will probably look to do is by putting in place better data management, looking at creating artificial learning, so through the likes of generative and machine learning, looking at the overall iterative processes in the background of what gets repeated and make those efficiencies. And it will actually go, why are we doing this? And it can probably very quickly, over the next couple of years, before we start seeing more solutions and technology coming out, whereby it can make actually a better user case and a better running of how that technology is going to be performing in the background. And it will make our lives a lot easier. So rather than having to run or rely on a data center manager to be in place, or having people to run those systems at a time, or to be having them run 24/7, it can basically look at, understand the energy modeling within those sites and actually say, these are the key times you need to run this, or actually be clever enough to actually understand, we've got a spike going through now, turn it on, and actually once that spike drops off, the energy then drops off, it then reduces the overall infrastructure. That will then have a big effect. So rather than having to crank everything out at 100% all the time from a cooling infrastructure perspective, it will look at those very quickly, those gaps in which we can drive it through. The challenge, though, you've got, which you've also said, is that for every single AI search, it does use 10 times more energy. This is where it becomes really tricky. So this is where new technology is having to start to be deployed for the use of AI. This is whereby we're looking at new single-phase immersion cooling, direct-to-chip cooling, more in-rows and rear doors, so we can get up to 50 to 100 kilowatts. But then also understanding, so this creates two potential outcomes, right? So one is the fact we have to put more energy into the output to get the AI to run. But there is a consequence at the back of that, which is what we're also looking to capture now, which is actually the heat. So looking at these new technologies and looking at it from, if we take a single phase and immersion for a dedicated AI server, and it says either direct-to-chip or immersion, both of these now are creating temperature ranges, which is scary, but that are starting at 40 degrees and going up to 70 degrees. So all of a sudden now we've got something which is almost like a heater in the data center. It's basically, we've now put, we've got a radiator sat here, bang. So the industry now needs to look at, which has been talking about for a while now. So we've been having conversations on this, and it's getting more and more forefront now with how we can make use of this heat. So it's looking at district heating. So we're looking at heat recovery solutions, but we're then looking at it from a good neighbor principle as well from a data center. So can this heat be utilized? So there's been examples where Equinix, for example, in Paris, are looking to heat an Olympic-sized swimming pool for the Olympics. So they're doing that. That's a great use of their heat they're capturing from those sites to then put to use. There's also another
Farms.
company, which is Deep Green in the UK. Yeah.
Farms.
So they're
Yeah,
looking at it
for
from
greenhouses.
so farming, you're looking at it for fishing, we're looking at it from recyclables, we're looking at it from district heating, but it's changing the narrative from a data center, which was historically a building that would be hidden out the way and not really utilized, well, not really seen to be there. So it'd be very low presence, but a big building doing an awful lot, but not really people touch. And we're now saying it needs to be viewed slightly differently. So we're now putting it not in the heart of a community, although the Nordic ways to looking at that, but it's to move it so it's a case of we can make much better use of any excess power or any excess heat, which is then given by that. And that then has a knock-on effect either to the local community or to local businesses, where they can then make use of what traditionally has just been lost to the atmosphere for all that heat, or just pumped back in from water and just kept low. So it's how we look at this and think about it much more, not just strategically, but much more like green for the environment and green for the community and green for the planet, to make sure that the solutions we're driving through have a much bigger aspect. And what we're seeing as well is a lot more of the permits and the regulations and a lot more the challenges for new sites has these requirements into them already. But it's now how data center operators and people financing these are now saying, okay, where can we put these into? What's possible? And this is where the conversation is getting more interesting and much more developing. But it's a case of AI is driving this hard in the background, because unfortunately, as the semiconductor space is getting smaller, so we're probably now looking at 3 nanometers, which is ridiculous, right? As a current norm for the latest chips. The next gen, we're probably looking at 2 nanometers, right? Air can't cool that. So it has to be either a dielectric fluid or some of a really smart way of cooling this down to get this down. And that is being driven purely because they can get more chips onto the board, they can increase the semiconductor efficiency, they can expand those servers more and more and more. So we're looking at much higher computational, much more higher abilities for these guys to spin it. Yeah, and it spins out.
Yeah.
And we're getting to that point whereby it becomes, if you've got 10 of these servers running, let's say, and you put them into an immersive tank, and that's happily generating 70 degrees of heat, you could use that, and that's brilliant. And if you can send that to your farm next door or your greenhouse next door for their planting, they're like, yeah, I don't have to use natural gas. I don't have to use an oil. I don't know what cooling they might even have like traditional oil-based cooling systems in there. But by getting rid of those steps, it just opens up the whole conversation to another level. So this is where the industry's been championing at this for the last couple of years. And I think it's now getting to a point where we're starting to see the fledgling sites starting to emerge onto this. And this is where the little edge sites are starting to utilize it first off, because they're much more small and mobile and nimble to deploy in the right areas. And I think later on down the line, we're going to see the much larger hyperscalers, like what you said earlier, Google, how they're going to be able to put these sites in a green space, utilize that heat within their buildings or within their economies or within their local resources, then pass that through. So it's a really developing scene at the moment. It's a case of, and if you tie on board everything else, it's I think data centers have got probably one of the hardest missions at the moment, because they're having to look at so many things coming at them at once about how we juggle this. So I don't think there's a right answer for most of them. It's a case of actually trying to pick the right path that they're going to be happy with for the next 5 to 10 years, and then know they've got to then change after that.
And at the same time, you have that steeper and steeper adoption curve that it is definitely not going to help at the same time. It is just unbelievable. If you think about, if you want to do a comparison,
it's crazy.
Think about when 20 years ago, social media's less than 20 years ago, social media, Facebook, came out and how long it took
Mm.
to get adopted, and how fast ChatGPT stormed into our daily lives
Was it like
worldwide.
65 million users in the first month or something like that they got
It's really,
subscribers to it?
it's ridiculous. But it's not just that; it is also the little brothers and sisters of ChatGPT they came after with their different variances. So it is
Yeah, I mean,
that doesn't help at all in terms of consumption. In terms of consumption, you were mentioning before the to build a solution, a sustainable solution. There are going to
mm,
be in the next couple of years some new technologies that are going to help. In your
yeah.
opinion, what kind of technology, if there is maybe one or two in particular that you are excited that is going to help with this?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting one. So I think one of the technologies we're starting to see coming through, I think hydrogen is going to have a much bigger part to play. I think at the moment there's a couple of challenges with how the hydrogen gets created because there's not enough mix globally, and I think it's hitting a few curveballs. But I think if we take on board some of the biomethane plants that are also starting to develop this, I think that is really a fascinating development that can also lead to much greener energy production, but also then lead to hydrogen sort of like technology taking off and generating really viable sort of like tier one sort of like power that could be utilized as a standardized. You're then using that as your primary source and then utilizing the grid as a backup, or in excess of that, passing sort of like power back to the grid where you don't need it. I think that is something that's coming through, which is absolutely amazing. We're then also looking at some of the new semiconductors that are coming out. So, like sort of Intel, I was listening to an American podcast yesterday and this morning, actually, just understanding it all. And now they're looking at high-end AI and some of those developments, which is like how
What
that's
is
going to drive
high-end
a lot
AI?
more of the market.
What is high-end AI?
High-end AI, it's a company which is coming out of the Netherlands. So previously, a lot of the chips are being made in Taiwan, and this is why there's
Mhm.
a global challenge in the background. So basically, for Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3, a lot of the high-end chips are developed and produced and manufactured in Taiwan
Yeah,
from a semiconductor industry, and that's where a
SMC,
lot of their
right? Yeah,
expertise, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, lies out there. What has been going on in the background is Intel are now looking at the next generation of where these chips are starting to come through from. And high-end AI, I believe, is either a Nordic or American company in the background, which they're looking into. And it's that next coming wave of chips. But what makes it even more is that we can probably start to see now over the next 10 years the end of where the semiconductors are actually going to be viable. And it's then a case of how we manage that heat going through. But it's then looking at the new technologies. So we're looking at currently to support that. We're looking at single phase immersion. We're looking at high density chips that are being run with like direct to chip cooling, and how that's then looking to take the heat directly out of the servers and be utilized. And there's about 20 or 40 companies that are developing new solutions every day in the tanks. We're looking at new dielectric fluids that are coming out, which are non-PFAS, so non-fluorinated sort of products. We're not creating any of the gases that were originally some of the challenges that 3M were facing a couple of years ago. And the whole industry is moving so fast and so quickly. But it's a case of where we're seeing it. We're seeing some of the bigger boys now developing their technologies and their solutions. So they're creating much more modular based. They're creating much more faster dynamics of how they do their energy management. They're looking at integrating some of the AI best practices and starting looking at generative AI for those logical systems to actually see where those savings can be made. And it's starting just to develop this further and further. So we're seeing this starting to come through. And it's then how we start to adopt that within our design principles, but also how we then look to the sites, then adopt this technology. And it just means that we're trying to stay ahead of the game. I mean, if we take, for example, what Elon Musk is doing with Tesla, I mean, I'm scared. I mean, it's a case of he's saying he's going to be taking to the market, is it next year, his Optimus bots for 2025, which is like a robot. And I'm thinking, is that then going to have a data center somewhere from basically a Tesla head office, which then works on a Wi-Fi system within those robots to then support their overall logical systems, or are they all standalone? I've got no idea, but this is new technology. And if we take the pace that where the markets go.
If he says 2025, it means it's going to be 2030. So it is, we have that bottom line, we say.
Well, hopefully.
Over the next 5 years and a half. It is
but
that
it's like,
this 5 years of delay at Tesla. So it's fine.
I hope so, because I think the rest of the world can just go at that moment, it's going, okay, we're fine with this. So yeah.
Look, John.
So yeah, cool.
I think that it is first of all such a fascinating thing, because you have to put together so many the competences and knowledge to be able to build a sustainable solution. It is not just inside the data center; it is also outside the data center. You were mentioning immersion cooling servers and heat recovery systems. Those are all fascinating. Let's not forget that obviously you can build as much renewables as you want, but even if you have battery storage, it's going to be very important of decarbonizing the grids outside of the data center. And we haven't talked much about it, but there is also the water part. That it is extremely important. So all that heat, if it is able to create a condensation methodology, is able to recapture that water part of it, anything can contribute. But yes, like you said, the scope 3 emissions are a hell of a job to be quantified first and then managed after. But nonetheless,
yeah, I haven't even touched on that, but yeah, that's another
super fascinating. Well, look, John, with this, I thank you for participating in this episode of Raw Green. It's been great. Lots to digest. We'll definitely
thank you for having me. It's been brilliant.
We'll definitely keep in touch, and I'll catch up soon.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Raw Green, brought to you by Obi. At Obi, we have designed our new Chief Sustainability Officer package to empower SMEs with comprehensive ESG solutions at a fraction of the cost compared to traditional solutions. Our entry package includes a full ESG report covering Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, a tailored emission reduction strategy, access to GRI certified software, and more. What sets us apart? Affordability. Our goal is to make sustainability accessible to businesses of all sizes. Contact us for a free consultation at info@oneob.com or through the links provided in the description. See you at the next episode. Ciao.